Every morning starts the same way. I wake up at 4:30, 2 hours before dawn, and lie still for a few minutes, listening to the silence of the big house. I've been used to waking up early since the expeditions. Abigail always joked that my internal alarm clock was more accurate than an atomic clock. Now that accuracy seems like a curse, too many quiet hours before the world wakes up. My name is Ezekiel Wardrop. I'm 75, and I became a widower 5 years ago. It's a strange word, clumsy and uncomfortable, like new shoes. It still rubs me the wrong way. Abigail and I have a 2-story house in Buchanan, with 3 bedrooms, a study, and a spacious veranda. We bought the land 40 years ago when we returned from Peru with pockets full of consulting money for an oil company. Abigail insisted on a big house. For the kids and grandkids, Zeke. In the end, there was only one child, our son Ellsworth. And now I have another daughter-in-law, Cassidy, and a granddaughter, Freya, who is now in college somewhere in Vermont. My mornings are scheduled by the minute. Rise, wash, coffee, check the mail. Breakfast at 7 o'clock and reading the fresh newspaper, which Pierce the mailman faithfully brings, even though I am probably the last subscriber to the print edition in our neighborhood. Then a walk to the lake and back, exactly 3 kilometers. The doctor says I'm holding up well for my age and arthritis, but each step is a reminder of time moving inexorably forward. Today, as usual, I pick up my cane with its polished amethyst handle, a gift from Abigail for our 30th anniversary. "So you'll always remember your first love," she said then, referring not to herself but to geology. We were both geologists, having met at university in a lecture on plate tectonics. She sat in the front row and asked the professor such questions that the old man blushed and stuttered. I fell in love before I knew her name. I walk outside, nodding to the neighbor's cat, a red-haired brat who has taken up my veranda as an observation post. The day promises to be warm, the sun already rising over the roofs, gilding the tops of the trees. "Good morning, Ezekiel. Early bird as always." Deirdre Holloway, my neighbor on the left, is watering her perfectly manicured hydrangeas. She's in her 60s, her hair cut short and practical, and there's an attentive, appraising look in her eyes. Not surprising for a former medical examiner. "Morning, Deirdre. You water those poor flowers like they owe you something," I reply with a chuckle. She snorts and turns off the hose. "And you wander around the neighborhood like an unaccountable ghost. I've seen it for days now. Why don't you come in for coffee after your walk? I have blueberry pie." I'm hesitating. Deirdre moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago after her divorce. We're not really friends, more like allies in misfortune. 2 lonely people on neighboring lots. If only for a cup. I have business in the city. It's a lie, and Deirdre knows it. What business could an old retired man have? But she nods understandingly and goes back to her flowers. I continue on my way to the lake. On the way, I reflect on the evening ahead. Today is Sunday, the day of the mandatory family dinner. Every second Sunday of the month, Ellsworth and Cassidy come to my place, ostensibly to check on old Dad. But I'm not blind, and I can see their eyes running around the house, assessing the surroundings. Ellsworth is 42, works as a business analyst for some corporation, and has always been too practical. As a kid, he wasn't interested in the rocks and fossils Abigail and I brought back from expeditions. He was mesmerized by numbers, the value of the artifacts, not their scientific value. Cassidy is just like her husband. She's the kind of woman who always looks like she just stepped off the cover of a magazine. She works at an advertising agency, always talking about brands and marketing strategies, as if she's telling me the great mysteries of the universe. The lake greets me with a slight ripple on the surface and the smell of freshness. I sit down on my usual bench, an old wooden one, with the initials of some couple in love carved many years ago. I don't know if they're still together. Abigail would make up a whole love story for them. Abigail. I still talk to her in my mind. "See, dear, how beautiful the sun plays on the water. Do you remember Lake Titicaca? It was very different, stark and ancient, like the Andes themselves. We spent 3 months there, exploring the bottom sediments. Abigail was amused by the name of the lake. She always laughed like a girl when she said it out loud. When I return, Deirdre is waiting for me with the promised coffee and cake on her veranda. "Tell me," she says without preamble, pouring coffee into a ceramic mug with a human skull on it. Typical Deirdre. "About what? You're frowning more than usual today. Family dinner?" I nod. Deirdre knows about my Sunday joys. She even saw Ellsworth and Cassidy leave me once, both of them with faces as sour as if they'd swallowed a lemon. "I don't know why you keep up this comedy," she said, cutting off a piece of pie. "If I were you, I'd tell them straight up. You want the house? Wait until I'm off my skates. I chuckle, imagining Cassidy's face if I actually said that. Ellsworth is my only son. So what? That doesn't give him the right to wait for you to die like a vulture. Nothing to object to. Lately, their visits have been particularly distressing. A month ago, Ellsworth casually mentioned a great place for the elderly, a boarding house on the outskirts of town. Cassidy went on about how impractical it would be for one person to live in such a large house. Have you heard from Freya? Deirdre asks, changing the subject. She knows talking about her granddaughter cheers me up. She called last week. She says her studies are going well. She's studying environmental science, the apple of the tree, as they say. Like you, not like her parents, Deirdre nods. Good girl. Freya is the only ray of light in my family life. She used to stay with Abigail and me as a child, and we took her on little expeditions. She inherited Abigail's curiosity and my stubborn methodicalness. Unlike her father, Freya was fascinated not by the prices of the artifacts we found, but by their stories, how they were formed, how old they were, what secrets they held. After Abigail's death, Freya began to visit less often. Studies, first relationships, growing up. But she's the only one who calls just for fun, not when she needs something specific. When I get home, I start getting ready for tonight. I get the roast meat out of the freezer. Cassidy likes to say she's watching her figure, but she never turns down a second helping of my rosemary roast. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rings. Punctuality is the only Ellsworth trait I can be proud of. He stands on the threshold, tall, trim, in an expensive suit, even on a Sunday. Cassidy is beside him, flawless makeup, pearl earrings, a smile that doesn't affect her eyes. Dad, Ellsworth hugs me formally, like a business associate. He smells of expensive cologne and ambition. Ezekiel, you look just fine, Cassidy chirps, kissing the air next to my cheek. That sweater makes you look so young. I thank her even though I'm wearing the same sweater I wore 2 weeks ago, and 2 weeks before that. It's just that Cassidy never remembers what I look like. Come on in, the roast is almost ready. We walk into the living room. Ellsworth immediately heads to the bar and pours himself a whiskey. Rough week? I ask, watching as he downs the glass almost in one gulp. Not a word, he says, wrinkling his nose. Our company's stock is down 14%. The board of directors is in a panic. That's terrible, Cassidy says, looking around. Oh, Ezekiel, did you move Mom's vase? Mom's, she says of Abigail. Never calls her by her name, even though she met her as a grown woman. No, it's just where it's always been. And I think it used to be on the mantle. Cassidy walks over to the vase and picks it up like she's appraising a sale. It's so beautiful. Must be expensive, huh? We bought it in Morocco for next to nothing, I answered dryly. The street vendor practically gave it away for nothing. That's a lie. The vase is an 18th century antique, and Abigail bought it at auction for a substantial sum. But it gives me grim pleasure to see the interest fade in my sister-in-law's eyes. At dinner, the conversation, as usual, revolves around Ellsworth's job, the new car they plan to buy, and the latest gossip from their social circle. They ask about themselves out of politeness without listening to the answers. And how's Freya? I inquire, putting Cassidy on her second helping of roast, which she doesn't want, but if you insist. Fine, Ellsworth replies with a full mouth. Picked such an impractical specialty, but what can you do? Youth. Ecology is an important science, I argue, especially now. Of course, he dismisses it. But how much money can you make from it? I told her about finance or at least marketing, but she's like you, stubborn. After dinner, while I'm doing the dishes, Cassidy's offer to help was so insincere I refused. I notice Ellsworth walking around the house, as if searching for something. He stops at a bookcase containing a collection of rare minerals. You know, Papa, he says, looking at a piece of malachite. Don't you think at your age it's time to think about, the future? This is a big house, it needs maintenance, and you're the only one here. I can manage, I answer briefly. Of course, he smiles hastily. It's just that, there are great options, smaller ones, with care, peer community. A nursing home, you mean? Why so harsh? He wrinkles his nose. A community for the elderly. A lot of people choose that option voluntarily. Thank you for your concern. I wipe my hands with a towel. But I'm fine here. In the house your mother and I built for the family. He sighs like I'm an unreasonable child who refuses to take his medicine. By the way, he changes the subject. Do you know a good financial advisor? We're having a little, investment issues. That's what it is. It's not just the stock that's down. They're in financial trouble. Suddenly their interest in my future has a new meaning. I'm afraid not, I reply. It's not customary in my senior living community to discuss investments. Ellsworth cringes, but before he can answer, Cassidy calls him from the living room. When I get there, she's standing against the wall, looking at pictures. "That's your honeymoon, isn't it?" she asks, pointing to a picture of Abigail and me standing in front of Machu Picchu. "No, that was an expedition," I answer. "We were investigating the geologic structure of the region for an international project." "Oh, how romantic," she says with a hint of sarcasm. "A honeymoon among the rocks." I don't answer. What is there to explain to someone for whom the whole world is just a set for selfies? When they finally leave, I feel relieved, as if I've dropped a heavy backpack. As I walk out onto the veranda, I notice Deirdre sitting on a chaise lounge with a glass of wine. "How'd it go?" she asks. "The usual," I reply. "Only this time they were hinting at a nursing home, and they seem to be having financial problems." Deirdre whistles. "What a surprise. You're not going to fall for that, are you?" I shake my head, looking up at the starry sky. "You know, Abigail always said that a house isn't the walls, but the people inside them. But sometimes I think that for Ellsworth, home is just the walls, and the ground beneath them." Deirdre doesn't say anything, just holds out a second glass of wine that she's obviously been holding out to me. We sit in silence, each of us thinking about our own things under the starry Buchanan sky. Tuesday morning greeted me with rain. I sat on the porch, wrapped in an old plaid blanket, and watched the drops drumming on the tin roof. The sound reminded me of the times Abigail and I slept in tents in the middle of the Peruvian mountains. I remember her clinging to me as the rain turned into a torrential downpour and the tarp ceiling sagged menacingly under the weight of the water. A phone call snapped me out of my memories. Freya's name popped up on the screen. My granddaughter rarely calls in the morning. She's usually in class at that time. "Grandpa?" Her voice sounded unusually excited. "How are you?" "Nothing new, baby. I'm just sitting here watching the rain. Why aren't you in class?" "I canceled because of the conference. Listen," I was thinking, "can I come visit you this weekend?" Something in her tone made me wary. Freya usually planned her visits in advance, rather than asking permission to come, as if she was afraid of rejection. "Of course, you know you're always welcome. Is something wrong?" She paused, and I heard her take a deep breath. "No, I just missed you. There's something I need to discuss. In person." After the conversation, I sat for a long time pondering. Freya's a straightforward person, not prone to drama or innuendo. If she wants to talk in person, then it must be serious. The rest of the weekend passed with the usual chores. I trimmed the hedges, went grocery shopping, and reread Abigail's favorite book on South American crystal formations. Deirdre stopped by twice, once for salt, the second time with a homemade pie that turned out to be practically inedible. She's a terrible cook, but I never tell her that. Friday night, Freya's tattered blue Ford appeared in the driveway. She jumped out of the car with her backpack on her shoulder, and I suddenly realized how long it had been since I'd seen her. The last time she'd come by was 3 months ago, when the school semester ended. She had lost a little weight since then, and her red hair had grown out and now fell below her shoulders. "Grandpa!" She hugged me tightly, smelling of the road, rain, and some herbs. "I missed you so much." "Me too, sunshine. Come on in. I made your favorite apple pie." We settled into the kitchen, where Freya greedily pounced on the pie, talking between sips about a new research project she was involved in. Something to do with aquatic microorganisms and freshwater pollution. I listened, enjoying her enthusiasm, so reminiscent of Abigail when she talked about new geologic discoveries. "What about your parents?" I asked when she paused to sip her tea. Freya froze, and I noticed the change in her face. It was as if a shadow ran across it, extinguishing the light in her eyes. They're fine," she said uncertainly. "Dad works a lot. Mom's busy with her agency." "Freya," I covered her hand with mine. "What's going on? You came here for a reason." She looked away, staring at the old photos on the wall. Abigail and I on a dig in Mongolia, little Ellsworth with his rock collection, the only time he'd ever shown any interest in geology. Freya at 5, proudly holding her first crystal. "I overheard a conversation," she began quietly. "Dad and Mom didn't know I was home. I came back early from the library and—" She fell silent, gathering her thoughts. "They were talking about you, and the house." A chill ran down my spine. "What did they say?" "Dad said they couldn't wait any longer." Her voice shook. "That they needed the money now, not when you, well, die?" I finished for her. Freya nodded, her eyes filling with tears. They were discussing how to convince you to sell the house and move to Sunny Acres, a nursing home on the outskirts of Buchanan. They said you couldn't manage on your own, that it was dangerous for you, and that the house was too big. I grinned unhappily. It was nothing new, the same arguments Ellsworth made on every visit. But something in Freya's face told me there was more to it. Papa said they were having money problems. Serious. Something to do with investments. He took out a loan against their house, and now the bank's threatening to take it away. She swallowed. He said that if you didn't take it voluntarily, they'd find a way to force you. So that was it. There was no trace of calm reflection left. A wave of anger rose up inside, not only at the son who was willing to evict his own father for money, but also at himself for not seeing the seriousness of the situation sooner. "Grandfather, I'm so ashamed," Freya whispered. "I didn't know what to do. They're my parents, but I'm your grandfather," I finished softly. "Don't beat yourself up, Freya. You did the right thing by telling me." We talked late into the night. Freya told me everything she knew about her parents' financial problems. Ellsworth had lost a large sum on a risky investment and then taken out a loan, hoping to get even, but it had only made things worse. Cassidy, accustomed to a certain lifestyle, refused to tighten her belts, continuing to spend on clothes and beauty salons. "They think your house is worth almost $1 million, Freya said, because of the location and the lot. The realtors say you could build several townhouses here." I looked at the old walls that held so many memories. Abigail had picked out every detail, from the shape of the doorknobs to the pattern on the ceiling molding. Imagining it all being torn down to build faceless townhouses was unbearable. The next morning, while Freya was still asleep, I called Hamish Brody, my attorney and longtime friend. We agreed to meet at his office on Monday. I didn't initiate Freya into my plans. The less she knew, the less her internal conflict between loyalty to her parents and concern for her grandfather. We spent the weekend taking walks around the lake, digging in the garden and sorting through old photo albums. I told Freya stories about her grandmother, about our adventures, about the countries we had traveled to. I tried not to show my anxiety, but I noticed how my granddaughter would sometimes cast attentive glances at me. On Sunday evening, as Freya was packing her things to leave in the morning, the doorbell rang. Ellsworth stood on the doorstep, alone, without Cassidy. "Dad," he smiled strained. "Thought I'd drop by, check on you." "On a bad day?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're usually on a schedule." "Just passing through," he shrugged, walking into the house. "Oh, Freya, I didn't realize you were here." They hugged, but I noticed my granddaughter's shoulders tense. She knew too much to be at ease with her father. "I'm here for the weekend," she said. Missed her grandfather. "How nice," Ellsworth smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Dad, can I talk to you for a minute?" We went into the study. Ellsworth closed the door behind us and looked around as if he were seeing the room for the first time. His eyes lingered on the antique globe Abigail and I had bought at an auction in London, then on the collection of minerals in the glass case. "What's up, Dad?" he began casually. "Getting on with the house?" "Excellent," I replied dryly. "To what do I owe this visit?" He sighed, apparently deciding to drop the social niceties. "I've been thinking about our last conversation, about you, moving somewhere more suitable." And I found the perfect place. Sunny Acres isn't just a nursing home, it's an active retirement community. There's a swimming pool, a library, even a geology club. He pulled a glossy booklet out of his pocket. "I've arranged a visit next Friday. Just a look, no strings attached." I took the booklet and flipped through it slowly. Smiling older people playing golf and sitting in wicker chairs with glasses in their hands. "Golden years in luxury and comfort," the slogan read. "What would happen to this house if I agreed to move?" I asked, though I knew the answer. Ellsworth pretended to be surprised by the question. "Well, it could be sold, of course. Why pay for the upkeep of an empty house? The proceeds would go toward your living in Acres, and the rest could be invested." "Invest?" I raised an eyebrow. "How did you invest your savings?" His face froze. "What do you mean?" "Nothing much," I shrugged. "Just interested in finance." He eyed me suspiciously, but decided not to pursue the subject. "Anyway, the house is too big for one person, and it needs constant upkeep. And you're not 20 anymore, Dad." "Not even 60, I agreed. "But I'm getting by, and I like it here. Every corner reminds me of your mother." His face softened at the mention of Abigail. For a moment, I saw him as the boy who'd sat on his mother's lap while she read him stories. But the moment passed quickly. "Mommy would want you to be safe," he said quietly. "You're all alone here. What if you fall or get a heart condition?" "I have a panic button," I pointed to the bracelet on my wrist. "And Deirdre's keeping an eye on me." "The roommate?" He snorted. "She's not young herself. What could she do in an emergency?" Our conversation was interrupted by Freya peeking into the study. "Grandpa, your milk is running out." I hurried to the kitchen, leaving Ellsworth in the study. When I returned a few minutes later, my son was standing by the bookcase, scrutinizing a collection of rare geology books. When he saw me, he quickly turned away. "Sorry, Dad, I have to go. Work, you know." He headed for the exit. "Think about Sunny Acres, okay? I'll pick you up Friday at 2. When he left, Freya looked at me questioningly. What did he want? "The same thing he always does," I sighed. "Trying to convince me to sell the house and move into a nursing home." "And you?" "Don't worry." I stroked her head like I did when I was a kid. "Your grandfather wasn't out of his mind to give up the house where he spent 40 years with the woman he loved so easily." She hugged me, and I felt the tension leave her body. "I was afraid they'd convince you." "Not today," I winked at her. "Now let's have tea with that awful cake Deirdre brought. If we don't eat it, she'll take offense and bring another one." On Monday, after seeing Freya off, I went to Hamish Brody's office. His firm was in an old building on Buchanan's Main Street, with oak paneling on the walls and creaky floorboards. Hamish, a gaunt man with thinning gray hair, had known Abigail and me for over 30 years. He'd drafted all of our contracts, from the land deed to the will. "Ezekiel." He shook my hand firmly. "It's good to see you. How is your health?" "I can't complain," I replied. "And yours?" "Arthritis is bothering me, but that's normal at our age," he grinned. "What can I do for you?" I told him everything about Ellsworth's hints, about Freya's confession, about my son's financial problems, and his plans for my house. Hamish listened intently, making occasional notes in his notebook. "So," he said when I finished, "you want to know if there's anything they can do to make you sell the house?" "Exactly. Or declare me incompetent, for example." He shook his head. "You'd need serious medical grounds for that. You're sane. You're managing your own household, making your own decisions. No court would declare you incompetent without a good reason." "And the house?" I asked you straight out. "Who owns it legally?" "You, of course." Hamish opened the file. "When Abigail died, you became the sole owner. The will says the house goes to Ellsworth when you die, but that can be changed." I've been thinking. Not that I wanted to disinherit my son, but the thought of him just waiting for me to die so he could have the house. "What are my options?" I asked. Hamish took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You could change the will. Leave the house to Freya, for example, or to a charitable organization. You can sell it yourself and dispose of the money as you see fit. You can make a life annuity, transferring ownership to a third party in exchange for regular payments for the rest of your life, with the right to live in the house. And if I don't change anything? Then Ellsworth will get the house when you die, as it's written in your will." Hamish paused. "But if you're afraid of more aggressive action on his part, we can take preventive measures, like having a statement of your legal capacity certified by a doctor." I nodded, thinking it over. It's sad to have to defend myself against my own son, but I guess that's the reality. "Give me time to think about it," I said finally. "I'll get back to you in a couple days." As I drove home, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Ellsworth and a man in a business suit were standing next to it. They were scrutinizing the house, and the man was writing something down in a clipboard. When Ellsworth saw me, he waved his hand with feigned joy. "Daddy, what a surprise. I thought you were home." "Apparently not," I answered coldly. "Who's that with you?" "This is Brandon Tucker," Ellsworth introduced his companion. "He's a real estate expert, just advising me on a few things." "Appraiser," I corrected him. "You're appraising my house." Brandon looked embarrassed, but quickly pulled himself together. "Mr. Wardrop, nice to meet you. I am indeed an appraiser, but I'm here unofficially, just as a friend of your son's." "Who happens to be taking notes on the condition of my property?" I pointed to the clipboard in his hands. Ellsworth stepped forward, coming between us. "Dad, it's not what you think. We were just discussing the value of my house," I finished for him. "A house I haven't decided to sell yet." Ellsworth looked as if he wanted to say something, but changed his mind. Instead, he gave me a strained smile. "Of course you have, Papa. It's your house and your decision. We were just looking at options. For the future. For the future, I repeated. Which from the looks of it, you plan on coming very soon. I walked past them toward the door, feeling the anger rising inside. My son wasn't just trying to convince me to sell the house. He was already planning the sale, like it was a done deal. Like I was just a temporary obstacle in the way of his goal. As I entered the house, I heard the appraiser's car start behind me. Through the window, I saw Ellsworth saying something to him, gesticulating vigorously. Then he got into his car and drove off too, without even trying to explain himself. I sank into the chair, feeling suddenly tired. There was a picture of Abigail on the table next to me. She was laughing, head thrown back, with a geology hammer in one hand and a piece of rock in the other. How many times have I looked at that picture, asking advice from a woman who is no longer around? "What would you do, Abby?" I whispered. "What would you tell our son?" There was no answer, just the silence of the big empty house. But suddenly I realized I knew what to do. Abigail always said, "If you can't change the direction of the wind, change the position of the sails." It was time to change the sails. I pulled out my phone and dialed Hamish's number. "I've made up my mind," I said when he answered. "Get the paperwork ready to change the will, and find me a good realtor, not a local one, but one from a neighboring county, so Ellsworth doesn't find out." "You're going to sell the house?" Hamish's voice sounded surprised. "Perhaps," I answered, "but on my terms, not my son's." As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I had my life in my hands again. The days after Ellsworth's visit with the appraiser dragged on slowly. I deliberately did not call my son, expecting him to take the initiative and somehow explain his behavior. But the phone was silent. Only Freya contacted me on Wednesday, asking if everything was all right. I didn't tell her what had happened. I didn't want to put her in an even more awkward position between me and her parents. Hamish and I met twice. He had prepared a draft of a new will where I would leave the house to Freya, but with the stipulation that she would not be able to take possession until she was 25. Until then, the house would be managed by a trust. Hamish also introduced me to a Ridge Creek realtor, Mrs. Prentice, an energetic woman with a discerning eye, who appraised the house much higher than I had expected. "Real estate in Buchanan is at a premium right now, Mr. Wardrop," she explained. "Especially lots this size and with a view of the lake. I'd even say it's a gold mine." I was in no hurry to decide to sell. Part of me still hoped that Ellsworth would come to his senses, that this was all just a misunderstanding. Naive, of course. On Friday, he finally called. "Dad," his voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "How about a family dinner on Sunday? I'll make your favorite lasagna." That's an odd suggestion. We usually had dinner at my place, and I cooked. "Why the sudden concern?" I asked him straight out. "I just want to see you," he paused, "and to discuss something important." "What's that?" "When we meet, Dad. A family matter." I agreed, feeling the tension building inside me. Family matter could only mean one thing: another conversation about the house. After the surveyor's visit, Ellsworth must have decided to be more forthcoming. Sunday night, I drove over to my son's house. Their house in the upscale Buchanan neighborhood was much smaller than mine, but newer and more modern. Glass, metal, minimalist. No traces of history, no things passed down from generation to generation. A house that could be sold without regret and bought another. Cassidy greeted me with feigned joy, as if we hadn't seen each other in years. She was wearing a new dress. I noticed the tag of a famous brand I'd seen in the paper once. Such things cost thousands. "Ezekiel, you look amazing." She kissed the air next to my cheek. Ellsworth was in the kitchen, conjuring up his famous lasagna. I made my way to the living room where the table was set for 3. Silverware, crystal glasses, snow-white tablecloth. It looked like they were hosting an important guest, not an old man's father. "Will there be anyone else?" I asked, pointing at the elegant setting. "No, just us," Cassidy smiled. "We just wanted to create a special atmosphere. A special atmosphere for a special conversation," I thought. Ellsworth came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. That image of the caring son chef seemed as fake as Cassidy's smile. "Daddy!" He hugged me. "Glad you could make it. How did you get here?" "By cab," I answered. "At my age, you shouldn't be driving at night anymore." "That's what we want to talk about," Ellsworth said, exchanging glances with his wife. "About your age and what it's like to live at this stage." I sighed. So predictable. "Why don't we have dinner first?" I suggested. I didn't want to spoil my appetite before it was over. They hesitated, clearly not expecting me to figure out their plan right away. But they quickly pulled themselves together. "Of course, Papa," Ellsworth said with a strained smile. "The lasagna is ready." Dinner passed in a strange atmosphere of forced ease. We talked about the weather, about the latest news, about Freya and her studies. The lasagna, by the way, was bland. Abigail always said our son had inherited my inability to cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. The real conversation began when Cassidy brought out dessert, a store-bought cheesecake she'd passed off as homemade. "So," Ellsworth began, coughing, "Cassidy and I have been thinking a lot about your future, Dad." "Really?" I raised an eyebrow. "Have you thought about yours too? About a future where you're up to your eyeballs in debt because of failed investments?" They froze, forks hanging in the air. Ellsworth turned pale, then red. "Who told you that? Does it matter?" I pushed my plate away. "I know about your financial problems, and that you plan to solve them at my expense." Cassidy gave her husband an accusing look. "I told you he'd figure it out," she hissed. "That's enough." Ellsworth raised his hand, stopping her. "Daddy, yes, we're in trouble. Serious problems. But we're thinking of you too. You're 75, living alone in a huge house. It's impractical and unsafe." "I didn't realize my son had suddenly become an expert on elderly safety," I replied sarcastically. "Listen," Ellsworth stepped forward. "We found a great place at Sunny Acres. You'll be supervised in the company of your peers. And the house. We'll sell the house. Some of the money will go towards your upkeep there, and some of it you'll use to get out of the financial hole you've put yourself in," I finished for him. "We're family," Cassidy stepped in. "Families help each other in times of need." "Families." I looked at her. "Where was this family when Abigail was dying? You visited her in the hospital twice in 3 months, both times for 5 minutes. We had work to do," she started. "Where was this family when I broke my hip 2 years ago?" I continued, not listening to her excuses. "You sent flowers. Flowers. You didn't even come to check on us." "We were on vacation, Dad," Ellsworth tried to explain. "We couldn't cancel the cruise because of an old father who might die." I finished for him. "No, of course not. Why? Because then the house would have gone to you automatically in the will, and I, coincidentally, survived." There was a heavy silence. Ellsworth clenched his teeth, clearly holding back his anger. "You are unfair," he said at last. "We care for you. We want your last years to be spent in comfort, and—" "My last years?" I laughed bitterly. "You've already given me a timeline? You know what, son? I could live another 20 years. My mother lived to 96, and yours probably would have too, if it hadn't been for the cancer. Are you willing to wait that long?" "Nobody's talking about waiting," Ellsworth raised his voice. "It's about being alone in a huge house that costs a fortune. That's irrational. Rational is selling the house of my memories, sending me to a nursing home, and taking the money for yourself." I shook my head. "And that's what my son is offering me. Not the whole nursing home, but a great apartment," Cassidy intervened. "We're not suggesting you live in a doghouse." "And how much are these nice apartments?" I asked bluntly. "And how much is my house worth, according to your expert?" They looked at each other, not expecting such a direct question. "The apartments cost $4,000 a month," Ellsworth answered reluctantly. "And the house, about $1 million, maybe more, if you sell it for development. So the difference is about $900,000, I calculated in my mind. Plus the monthly payments on the apartments. And all this you want to get now, not wait for my death. That's very, rational. Daddy, stop making monsters out of us." Ellsworth pounded his fist on the table. "Yes, we need money. We're on the verge of bankruptcy. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our house. What's wrong with asking for help from a father who has the means?" "Nothing if you really asked," I said calmly. "But you're not asking. You're demanding. You've already decided everything for me, where to move, how to dispose of my property. You even brought an appraiser without asking my permission. What were we supposed to do?" Cassidy stepped in. "You're as stubborn as a donkey. How many times have we hinted that we needed help? You pretended you didn't understand." "Hinted?" I chuckled. "So all that talk about a house too big for one wasn't concern, but hints that you needed money? It doesn't make any difference." She shook her hands. "The fact is we need money, and you have an asset that you're not using effectively." "Asset?" I looked at her in amazement. "It's the house where I lived for 40 years with the woman I loved, the house where your husband grew up. a house full of memories. And for you, it's just an asset that can be converted into money. Sentimentality is a luxury we can't afford, Ellsworth cut him off. I'm sorry, Dad, but we need your house. You're going to have to move out. There it is, straight and unadorned. I felt something cold and heavy sink into my chest. Have to? I asked quietly. Yes, Ellsworth looked me straight in the eye. Dad, our family needs your house, so move out. We've already found you a place at the Acres. The down payment's in. In 2 weeks, you can move in. I looked at my son, trying to see something of myself or Abigail in him, but I didn't. There was a stranger sitting in front of me. I rose slowly, leaning on my cane. You've decided to disregard my opinion? All right. Dad, sit down. Ellsworth also stood up. You're acting like a child. No, son, I shook my head. You're the one acting like a child. A spoiled, selfish child who thinks only of his own desires. But there's just one problem. I own the house, and I'm the only one who decides what to do with it. We can go to court, Cassidy intervened. If we can prove that you're incapacitated. On what grounds? I grinned. On the grounds that I don't want to give you my property? My lawyer and my doctor will be happy to see you in court. We'll have no choice. Ellsworth clenched his fists. If you don't agree voluntarily, then what? I looked him straight in the eye. Lock me up in a mental institution? Forge my signature on documents? Or maybe just wait for me to die of natural causes? Just don't wait too long. Like I said, my genes suggest another couple decades of life. I headed for the door. Ellsworth tried to stop me by grabbing my arm. Dad, we're not finished. No, Ellsworth, we're done. I pulled my hand free. And mark my words, you'll never get this house. Never. I walked outside, feeling my hands shaking, not from fear, but from anger. I took out my cell phone and called a cab. While I waited, I saw Ellsworth watching me from the window. His face was contorted with anger and disappointment. He was obviously hoping for a different outcome to this evening. At home, I could not sleep. I went from room to room, looking at the things I had accumulated over a long life. Each one had a story to tell, connected to Abigail or our travels. What would Ellsworth and Cassidy do with them? Sell them at auction? Thrown away like junk? At dawn, I made a decision. It was painful but necessary. I called Hamish, not caring about the early hour. I need all the paperwork today, I said when he sleepily answered. And one more thing. What's that? I could hear the worry in his voice. I want to officially sign Ellsworth and Cassidy out of the house, I answered firmly. They've never lived here, but they're legally listed as family members with a right of occupancy. I want that right canceled. It can be done, Hamish said slowly, but it would look like an escalation of the conflict. The conflict has already escalated, I sighed. They've explicitly stated that they're going to make me sell the house and move into a nursing home. I'm just defending myself. Hamish was silent, digesting the information. I'll prepare all the necessary documents, he finally said. Be in my office at 10 in the morning. At 9:30, I was already sitting in Hamish's reception, nervously tapping my cane on the floor. The secretary, an old woman with kind eyes, offered me tea several times, but I refused. My thoughts were revolving around yesterday's conversation and upcoming actions. When Hamish finally invited me into his office, there was a stack of documents on his desk. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked, pointing to the papers. It's a big step. I'm more than sure, I replied. My son has crossed the line. He won't get another dime from my estate. Hamish nodded and slid the first document toward me. This is a change of will. You leave the house to Freya, with the stipulation that it be in a trust until he's 25. Ellsworth is excluded from inheritance entirely, I signed, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and relief. These are Ellsworth and Cassidy's discharge papers. Hamish slid the second stack over. Once they're registered, they won't have any legal rights to use the property. I signed those papers too, trying not to think about how Ellsworth would react when he got the notice. One last thing. Hamish pulled out another document. This is a power of attorney for me as your representative. If Ellsworth tries to do anything legally, I can act on your behalf without further approval. When everything was signed, I felt strangely empty. It was as if something important had ended, not just in my relationship with my son, but in my life in general. What now? I asked Hamish. Now I register the documents in the appropriate authorities, he answered. And you, go home and wait. But be prepared that Ellsworth won't take it lightly. I nodded. Of course he wouldn't. He was counting on easy prey, an old man he could manipulate. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I'll be ready, I said, rising. And thank you, Hamish, for everything. As I walked out of the office, I took a deep breath of fresh fall air. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from obligations to a son who had long since ceased to be a son in the full sense of the word. On the way home, I stopped at a flower store and bought a bouquet of white lilies, Abigail's favorite flowers. At home, I put them in a vase in front of her picture. I hope you understand why I did that, I said to the image. It left me with no choice. And it seemed to me that Abigail looked from the picture with understanding and support. After all, she'd always been a strong woman who wouldn't let anyone dictate how she lived her life. Now all that was left to do was wait for Ellsworth's reaction and prepare for the fact that this story was far from over. The morning was overcast, as if nature itself reflected my mood. I was sitting on the veranda with a cup of tea when Ellsworth's silver sedan stopped in the driveway with a squeal of brakes. The door swung open, and my son flew out of the car, waving some papers. His face was contorted with anger, and his shirt collar was buttoned unevenly, a clear sign that he was in a hurry and out of control. Cassidy slipped out after him, high heels and perfectly styled. Even in a moment of marital crisis, she couldn't afford to look disheveled. "What is this?" Ellsworth ran up the veranda steps, shaking the papers in my face. "What's the joke, Papa?" I sipped my tea calmly, not showing my pounding heart. The discharge notice had gotten to them faster than I'd expected. "This is no joke, Ellsworth. This is an official notice." "A discharge notice?" He was practically screaming. "The house I grew up in? Where I've been registered all my life? Where you haven't lived in 20 years, I pointed out. And where you only look in when you need something." Cassidy stepped closer, her eyes narrowed. "Ezekiel, that's low, even for you." Her voice oozed venom. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done?" I set the cup down on the table. "Remind me, please." She opened her mouth but then closed it. No concrete examples, apparently. "We're your family," Ellsworth intervened. "The only family you have left." "Family?" I looked at them both. "Family doesn't demand you sell the house and move into a nursing home. Family doesn't bring in appraisers behind your back. Family doesn't threaten to declare a relative incapacitated if they don't give up their property." "You've got it all wrong," Cassidy tried to soften her tone. "We just wanted to—" "I understood perfectly well," I interrupted her. "You wanted my money. That's all you wanted. And when I refused to give it to you, you made threats. We can sue." Ellsworth clenched his fists. "We can appeal the decision." "On what grounds?" I raised an eyebrow. "You're an adult. You have your own place. What legal right do you have to live in my house?" He opened his mouth but couldn't come up with an answer. Obviously, he had already consulted a lawyer and knew there was no basis. "You can't just cut us out of your life," he changed tactics. "I am your son, your flesh and blood, which I can disregard if I want to." I repeated his words from a recent conversation. "You made the rules, Ellsworth. I'm just following them." Cassidy put her hand on her husband's shoulder, clearly trying to reassure him. Then she sat down next to me, giving me her most heartfelt look. "Listen, Ezekiel," she began in a honeyed voice. "We've all gotten a little overexcited. This situation, it's no good for anybody. Why don't we just forget about it and start over? Let's sit down and calmly discuss what's best for all of us." "What do you suggest?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "We could help you find a good place to live. More suitable for your age. And with a house? With the house, you'll help me dispose of it properly," I finished for her. "That is, sell it and give the money to you." Cassidy blushed. "It doesn't have to be all of it, just part of it, to help us get back on our feet. We're in a desperate situation, Ezekiel. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our house." "And how is that my fault?" I asked you bluntly. "That your husband lost money on a stupid investment? Or the fact that you continue to live large despite your debts?" Ellsworth couldn't take it anymore. "Stop lecturing us." He raised his voice again. "You're no saint, Papa. Remember when you went bankrupt in the 80s? Who helped you then? Grandma. She sold her house so you could pay off your debts." I shuddered. An old story I preferred not to remember. My mother had indeed sold her house to help Abigail and me through the hard times when our geology firm went bankrupt because of the oil crisis. "That was different," I said quietly. "Your mother and I lost everything because of circumstances we couldn't control. The world crisis, the collapse of oil prices, not because we gambled in the stock market or spent more than we earned." "What's the difference?" Ellsworth splayed his hands. "Grandma didn't ask you why you were broke. She just helped because you were her son." I looked at him and saw not a grown man, but a resentful boy who thought the world owed him a favor. Abigail and I had made a mistake somewhere in his upbringing. There's a significant difference, I replied calmly. I never demanded that my mother sell the house. It was her decision. And you came to me with an ultimatum and threats. Because you're a stubborn old man who can't see beyond his own nose, Ellsworth blurted out. I can't deal with you amicably. Amicable? I grinned. What's that? Dad, our family needs your house. Move out is nice. Ellsworth clenched his fist so hard his knuckles turned white. You know what? I don't care. He raised his voice. You've decided to write us out of the house? Fine. But don't think that's the end of it. We're gonna sue. We'll prove that you're incompetent. And then what? I stand up, leaning on my cane. You'll get custody of me, and you'll have custody of my assets. Is that your plan? The look on his face was more eloquent than any answer. Get out of my house, I said quietly but firmly. Both of you. Now. Papa, Ellsworth began, but I interrupted him. I said get out, or I'll call the police. I have every reason to believe you've been discharged from the house and are here uninvited. Cassidy grabbed her husband's arm. Come on, Ellsworth. There's nothing for us to do here. She pulled him toward the exit, but turned around at the door. You'll regret this, Ezekiel. I swear you'll regret it bitterly. When they left, I felt my strength leaving me. I sank into the chair, my whole body trembling, not from fear, but from the realization of what had happened. I had just permanently severed my relationship with my only son, the man Abigail and I had raised, the man we'd given so much love and care to. What have I done, Abby? I whispered, looking at her picture. What had we missed in raising him? But the picture was silent, and Abigail's voice echoed in my head. You did what you had to do, Zeke. You protected yourself and our home. Deirdre showed up half an hour later. She must have heard the screams. You all right? She sat down next to me. I saw your son and daughter-in-law leaving. They didn't look not very friendly. I told her all about the discharge, Ellsworth's visit, his threats. Tough, she whistled when I was done. But right. If you'd given in, they'd have sucked you dry and thrown you away like a used tea bag. I know, I sighed. But that doesn't change the fact that I just lost my son. You lost him much earlier. Deirdre covered my hand with hers. It's just that today you recognized it. That evening Hamish called. Ellsworth had already contacted him, demanding to cancel the discharge papers. I explained to him that it's impossible without your consent, the lawyer said. He threatened to sue. I told him he was free to file any lawsuit he wanted, but he had no chance. He'll try to prove that I'm incapacitated, I warned him. He's already trying, Hamish sighed. He says you're showing signs of senile dementia, paranoia, and aggression. Allegedly, your actions are proof that you're not yourself. So what now? Now we wait, Hamish replied. If he does file a lawsuit, we'll have to provide medical reports about your mental state. But I don't think it will come to that. He has no proof. I couldn't sleep that night. Everything that had happened in the last few days was running through my head, keeping me awake. I thought about Abigail, about what she'd do in my place. And the more I thought, the clearer the thought I'd been chasing away for the past few days became. In the morning, I called Mrs. Prentice, the realtor from Ridge Creek. Mr. Wardrop. Her voice sounded cheerful even at 8 in the morning. What can I do for you? I want to sell the house, I said bluntly. As soon as possible. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure? She asked cautiously. Last time you had doubts? I'm sure now, I replied. Completely. We made an appointment to meet the same day. I spent the morning preparing for it, gathering documents on the house, making notes about its features that might interest buyers. And the more I immersed myself in these practical details, the lighter I felt. I was doing something concrete, taking control of the situation. Mrs. Prentice arrived at noon. She was a diminutive middle-aged woman with a shrewd eye and a business acumen that even her smile and gentle manners did not conceal. So, Mr. Wardrop, she seated herself at the kitchen table, spreading papers and a clipboard in front of her. Let's go over the details. You want to sell the house quickly, I understand? Yes, I nodded. I'm having a difficult situation with my son. He thinks he's entitled to the house, and I want to close the matter before he takes any legal steps. She nodded understandingly. Family conflicts are the most difficult, especially when it comes to real estate. We discussed the preliminary appraisal of the house. Mrs. Prentice confirmed what she'd said earlier. The real estate market in Buchanan is booming, and a house of this size, with this lot and this view of the lake, might be worth more than I'd expected. Given the size of the lot and its location, we could be asking $1,100,000, she said, checking her notes. In this neighborhood, the average price per square meter has gone up 12% in the last year. And if you have to sell urgently, I asked, how much would I have to reduce the price? She thought for a moment. If we want to sell within a month, I would recommend setting the price at $1 million. It's still a very good amount, but more attractive to buyers, especially if they know you're willing to close the deal quickly. We drew up a plan of action. Mrs. Prentice suggested starting with a professional photo shoot of the house and lot, preparing advertising materials and placing ads in specialty publications. She also suggested holding an open house, a day when potential buyers could come and view the property. What about the legal side? I asked. My son might try to challenge the sale. On what grounds? She raised an eyebrow. You own the house. You have every right to dispose of it. The only thing he could do would be to try to prove that you're incompetent, but that would require serious grounds and medical evidence. That's exactly what he was talking about, I sighed, which would prove I was incapacitated. Mrs. Prentice thought for a moment. In that case, I'd recommend that you get some insurance. Get an independent medical examination and a report on your mental state. That would close any potential loopholes. I agreed. The thought of having to prove my sanity was humiliating, but a necessary precaution. After the realtor left, I sat back in my chair feeling a mixture of determination and sadness. I was really going to sell the house I had lived in most of my life, a house filled with memories of Abigail, of our life together, of Ellsworth's birth and growing up. I'm sorry, Abby, I whispered, looking at her picture. But I can't leave it to Ellsworth. He doesn't appreciate what we've created. It's just an asset to him. I pictured Ellsworth and Cassidy selling the house after I died, how happy they were with the money they got, how they quickly forgot that this was once home to people who loved each other and created their own little world. And that picture strengthened my resolve. The next few days passed in preparation for the sale. I walked around the house deciding what to take with me and what to keep. Some things were inextricably linked to the house. The antique clock in the living room that Abigail and I had bought at a flea market in Paris. The tiled fireplace that she had painted herself. The cherry tree in the garden, planted on Ellsworth's birthday. Other things I couldn't leave behind. The mineral collection gathered over decades of expeditions. The photographs. The letters Abigail wrote to me when we were forced to work in different parts of the world. I began packing up these treasures, each one evoking memories, happy and sad, vivid and time-blurred. Friday morning, the phone rang. I expected to hear Hamish or Mrs. Prentice, but it was Freya on the other end. Grandfather, her voice sounded worried. What's going on? Dad's furious. He says you've written them out of the house and changed the will. I sighed. Surely Ellsworth couldn't help but drag Freya into our conflict. It's true, sunshine, I admitted. After our last conversation, the situation escalated. I told her all about the family dinner, Ellsworth's demands, his threats, and my decision to sell the house. Sell? Her voice trembled. But grandfather, you love this house. Your whole life with Grandma is here. I know, sweetheart. I felt a lump in my throat. But I can't leave it to your father. He'll just sell it after I'm dead without even thinking about its value. And this way, at least I can decide how I want to use the money from the sale. Where will you move to? Freya asked after a pause. It was a question I'd been asking myself for the last few days. The prospect of a nursing home was as repugnant as ever. But I had another idea. I was thinking of a small apartment somewhere in the city, I answered. And then, maybe a trip. You know, your grandmother and I have always wanted to go to Iceland. To study the volcanic rocks, to see the geysers. A trip? I could hear the surprise in her voice. At your age? Alone? Why not? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I'm 75, not 95. I'm perfectly capable of traveling. And you know I've never been afraid of being alone. There was silence on the other end of the wire. Then Freya asked quietly, Grandfather, what about me? You're not going to disappear from my life, are you? Never, I answered firmly. You're the only thing keeping me in this family, Freya. We'll always be in touch, I promise. And you'll always be able to come to me, wherever I am. Dad says he's going to sue, her voice got quieter. That he'll prove you're insane and take the house. He's very angry, Grandpa. I know, I sighed. But he won't be able to prove something that isn't there. I'm sane and of sound mind, and any doctor will attest to that. We talked for another hour or so. Freya told me that her parents are constantly fighting over financial problems. Cassidy blames Ellsworth for bad investments, and he blames her for overspending. Now that the hope of a quick fix in the form of my house is gone, the situation has become quite tense. They don't even realize what they're doing, Freya's voice shook. They talk about you as if you're just an obstacle, not a person but a problem to be solved. The words hurt, but they didn't surprise me. I'd long suspected that to Ellsworth I'd ceased to be a father, only a potential source of money. Don't worry about me, Freya, I said softly. I'll be fine. Focus on your studies and your goals. Don't let your parents' problems interfere with your life. After talking to my granddaughter, I felt both longing and determination. Sadness because of the broken family ties, and determination because now I knew I was doing the right thing. If Ellsworth thinks I'm just a hindrance to the money, I'll remove that hindrance. But he would not get the money, at least not in the way he had hoped. In the evening, Deirdre came in with a bottle of whiskey. We sat on the veranda, watching the sun set behind the treetops, coloring the lake in golden tones. So you've decided to sell, she didn't ask, but stated. Yes, I nodded. I can't leave it to Ellsworth, and I don't want him to keep thinking of the house as his future asset. And then what? She turned to me. Where are you going to go? I told her my plans. An apartment in the city, a trip to Iceland, maybe even South America, where Abigail and I had spent so much time. A bold decision, she smiled. But the right one. Life doesn't end at 75, especially a life like yours. We drank to new beginnings, to courage and freedom from other people's expectations. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not only the bitterness of breaking up with my son, but also a strange, almost forgotten feeling, the anticipation of adventure. The next morning, I met Mrs. Prentice at her office in Ridge Creek. We had signed a contract to sell the house, and she promised that she would begin showing it to potential buyers early the following week. I'm sure we'll find a good buyer quickly, she said, shaking my hand. It's a great house, and the market is active right now, especially in your neighborhood. As I drove home, I thought about what lay ahead. Selling the house, moving, a new life in a new place. At 75, I was starting over. It was both frightening and exciting at the same time. Would you approve, Abby? I asked aloud, looking at the passenger seat where she usually sat on our trips. Would you say I'm a crazy old man who doesn't know when to stop? There was no answer, but I could almost hear her laugh and see her shake her head. Zeke, you never knew when to stop. That's why I loved you. And with that thought, I smiled, feeling like I had made the right decision. Ellsworth had wanted to take the house away from me, thinking it would take away my power and control over my life. But he was wrong. The real strength wasn't in the walls and foundation, but in me, in my ability to make decisions and act despite my age and circumstances. The house was just a building. The memories and love I shared with Abigail I could take with me anywhere. Everything else was just details that could be changed. Mrs. Prentice was a man of her word. 3 days after we met, she organized the first showing of the house. I watched potential buyers walk through the rooms, looking at the ceilings, the walls, the wiring. It's a strange feeling to see strangers exploring a space you've considered exclusively yours for 4 decades. The first couple were newlyweds, too young and inexperienced to realize the true value of the house. They talked about remodeling and modern design, as if they were going to erase the entire history of the place. I was almost glad when they left without showing serious interest. The second potential buyer, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and a clipboard on which he kept marking something, turned out to be a real estate developer. He frankly stated that he planned to demolish the house and build several townhouses on the lot. You can fit at least 4 units here, and with a view of the lake, they'll cost 3 times as much as regular units, he said, not noticing how I flinched at those words. The hardest part was showing the family bedrooms. Ellsworth's room, which Abigail and I had prepared so carefully for his birth, choosing every detail with love. Abigail and I's bedroom, where we'd spent thousands of nights sharing dreams, plans, worries. The guest room, where Freya stayed during visits. It's hard, isn't it? Deirdre asked, coming in the evening after the next potential buyers had left. We were sitting on the veranda with tea, watching the sunset over the lake. Harder than I expected, I admitted. I knew it would be painful to sell the house, but I didn't realize it would be so hard to watch strangers plan to change or destroy what Abigail and I had so lovingly created. Deirdre nodded understandingly. When I sold the house after my divorce, I felt the same way. Like I was betraying not only the building, but all the memories associated with it. Exactly, I sighed. The rational part of me realizes it's just walls and a roof. But the emotional part, every corner of this place holds a piece of Abby and me. Have you thought about where you'll live after the sale? Deirdre asked, changing the subject. Mrs. Prentice showed me several apartment options in downtown Buchanan. There's one I like, small but bright, overlooking the city park. And after I move in, I plan to travel. Traveling? Deirdre looked surprised. Where? Iceland, for starters. I smiled, seeing her reaction. Abigail and I had always wanted to explore the volcanic rocks of Iceland, but we'd never gotten around to it. And then maybe South America, back to the places we worked when we were young. You're full of surprises, Ezekiel Wardrop. Deirdre shook her head, but I could see the approval in her eyes. Most people your age are looking for a quiet life, and you're going to conquer volcanoes. It's my son's fault, I grinned. If it weren't for his greed, I'd probably be sitting in this house for the rest of my life, poring over old photographs. And now I had an opportunity to start something new, an opportunity I wouldn't have given myself. Deirdre looked at me thoughtfully. You know, I always thought I'd retire and grow flowers. Sitting on the veranda, drinking tea, complaining about my arthritis. The ordinary life of an old lady, she paused. But looking at you, I'm thinking, maybe I too could do something more exciting with the time I have left. Like what? I raised an eyebrow. I don't know, she shrugged. Maybe join some sort of medical mission. I'm a former medical examiner after all. My skills could come in handy. We sat up late into the night discussing the opportunities that life still offered us, despite our age. For the first time in a long time, I felt not only the bitterness of breaking up with my son, but also a strange, almost forgotten feeling of anticipation, as if I was young again, and the world was full of uncharted roads. On the 5th day of the show, Mrs. Prentice called with the news. There was a serious buyer, a middle-aged couple, a geology professor from the local university, and his wife, an artist. They fell in love with the house at first sight. They don't even want to change anything, Mrs. Prentice said with undisguised surprise in her voice. They say it's perfect just the way it is. They especially like your study, with its mineral collection and geology library. I felt the tension that had been gripping me for the past few days let go a little. The thought that the house would go to people who would appreciate its history and character was comforting. They're offering $1,020,000, Mrs. Prentice continued, above our asking price, and they're willing to close the deal quickly within a month. I want to meet them, I said firmly, in person, before making a final decision. Mrs. Prentice agreed to arrange a meeting. The next day, Oliver and Linda Brooks came over for tea. Oliver turned out to be an energetic man with lively eyes behind round glasses and a mop of graying hair. Linda was a quiet woman with an artist's eye for detail. Your house is amazing, Mr. Wardrop, Oliver said, looking around admiringly. Especially for a geologist like me, this collection of minerals and the books. You have a first edition of Lyell's Principles of Geology. My wife and I have been collecting them all our lives, I smiled, seeing the genuine admiration in his eyes. On expeditions all over the world. Are you a geologist too? Oliver stepped forward with increased interest. I was, I nodded. Abigail, my late wife, and I graduated together and started a small consulting firm. We worked with oil companies, research institutes. The conversation turned to geologic formations, expeditions, and scientific discoveries. Linda, although she was not an expert in this field, listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed her genuine interest. Linda and I have wanted a house like this for a long time, Oliver said, as we moved on to the terms of the sale. A place where we could spend time with our grandchildren, where I could write the book I'd been working on for the past 5 years, and Linda could paint. What's the book? I asked. The History of the Earth Through the Lens of Mineralogy, he replied enthusiastically. A popular account of how the study of minerals helps us understand the evolution of our planet. By the end of the meeting, I was almost certain I had found the perfect buyers. People who would not only preserve the house, but bring new life to it, a new history based on respect for the past. I'll take your price, I said, shaking Oliver's hand. And I'm glad the house will go to people who will appreciate it. 2 days later, Mrs. Prentice and I drew up a preliminary contract. It was going to take about a month to formalize the sale. Document verification, property appraisal, bank transactions. But the basic agreement was reached. The house would be sold to the Brookses for $1,020,000. I was sorting through old photo albums, deciding what to take with me and what to leave behind, when the doorbell rang. Freya stood on the doorstep with a backpack on her shoulder and a worried expression on her face. "Grandpa," she hugged me tightly. "I came as soon as I could get out of the university." "Did something happen?" I asked, walking her into the house. "Are you okay?" "I am," she set her backpack on the floor. "As a family, not so much. Dad's been going crazy about the house. He wants to sue to have you declared incompetent." I sighed. Hamish had warned me about that possibility, but I'd hoped Ellsworth wouldn't go that far. "And you'd come to, what? To talk me out of selling the house?" I asked bluntly. "No," Freya shook her head. "I came to try to reconcile the two of you. Grandfather, that's crazy. A 40-year relationship ruined over a house." I led my granddaughter into the kitchen and made tea. Abigail always said that difficult conversations were best had over a nice cup of tea. "It's not about the house, Freya," I said, sitting down across from her. "It's about the way your father treats me, as an obstacle to money, not as a father, not as a man, as a problem to be solved." I told her about our last conversation, how Ellsworth had openly demanded that I move out, his threats, his attempts at manipulation. He didn't even try to hide the fact that his main concern was the money from the sale of the house, not my well-being, I finished bitterly. It was just business for him, cold calculation. Freya listened with eyes widened with horror. "I didn't know it was that bad," she whispered. "Papa said you were being unreasonably stubborn, with no thought for your health and safety." "And did you believe it?" I looked into her eyes. "Yeah, didn't know what to believe," she lowered her gaze. "That's why I came here. I wanted to hear your side of the story." I told her about the Brookses, that the deal was almost done, and my plans for the future. "Iceland? Really?" She smiled for the first time since arriving. "Grandpa, that is amazing, isn't it?" I was surprised by her reaction. "I thought you'd say it was crazy at my age." "Crazy?" Freya shook her head vigorously. "That's the sanest thing I've heard in weeks. You've always been drawn to adventure, to new places. Grandmother always said you weren't the type to sit still." Her encouragement meant more to me than I could ever express. We spent the evening looking at old photos and talking about my future plans. Freya even offered to join me in Iceland on vacation. "I'm studying aquatic systems ecology," she reminded me. "Iceland's thermal springs are the perfect place for research. We could combine your interest in geology and my interest in ecosystems." I fell asleep feeling grateful for this girl, so different from her father. I saw Abigail in her, the same fire in her eyes, the same passion for knowledge, the same stubbornness to stand up for what she believed in. In the morning, I was awakened by Hamish's call. His voice sounded worried. "Ezekiel, Ellsworth has filed a lawsuit. He wants you declared incompetent and appointed temporary guardian until the court decides." "On what grounds?" I could feel the anger rising inside me. "He claims that your behavior in recent weeks indicates dementia and paranoid tendencies. He cites discharging you from your home, changing your will, selling your property in a hurry. Says you've become suspicious and aggressive, accusing family members of intending to harm you." "But that's a lie." I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm not paranoid. I react to real actions and words." "I know," Hamish sighed. "But the court has to hear the suit. You'll have to undergo a psychiatric evaluation." "How will that affect the sale of the house?" I asked, trying to be practical. "If the judge grants the motion for temporary guardianship pending a decision on the main suit, Ellsworth will be able to block any dealings with your property, including the sale of the house. That's what he's counting on," I grinned bitterly. "To delay the process, to prevent the sale, and then perhaps to make me agree to his terms because I was tired of fighting." "Maybe," Hamish agreed. "But we have an advantage. We have prepared for such a development. We have medical reports about your condition, testimonies of people who regularly communicate with you, and importantly, we can show that Ellsworth's actions are motivated not by concern for you, but by financial gain." As I hung up the phone, Freya came into the kitchen, sleepy and worried. "Grandpa, what's wrong?" I told her about Hamish's call, about Ellsworth's actions. She turned pale. "He really did it," she whispered. "I didn't believe he'd go this far." "Believe me, your father is capable of a lot when it comes to money," I sighed. "But don't worry, we were prepared for such a development." After breakfast, Freya volunteered to help me sort through my things. We were working in the study, packing books and papers, when the doorbell rang again. An unfamiliar man in an austere suit and carrying a leather briefcase stood on the threshold. "Mr. Ezekiel Wardrop?" he asked in a formal tone. "I'm Gerald Knox, a representative of the court. I'm giving you notice of a hearing to declare you incompetent and appoint a temporary guardian." He handed me a stamped envelope. I took it, feeling my hands shaking, not from fear, but from anger. "The hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now," Knox continued. "Your presence is mandatory. You'll also need to provide medical documentation to prove your mental state." When he left, Freya took my hand. "Grandfather, it's awful," her voice shook. "How could Daddy do this?" "Desperation," I answered, opening the envelope. "He's losing the house he's already mentally paid for. He's cornered, and people in that position are capable of extreme measures." The papers stated that the plaintiff, Ellsworth Wardrop, sought a declaration that the defendant, Ezekiel Wardrop, was incapable of making financial and legal decisions due to progressive dementia, paranoia, and susceptibility to manipulation by third parties. Evidence cited included dramatic changes in behavior, irrational decisions regarding property, and unwarranted hostility toward close family members. "That's an outright lie." Freya was indignant, reading the documents over my shoulder. "You're one of the most rational people I know." "Thank you for your trust, sweetheart," I smiled weakly. "But the court needs facts, not emotional assurances. Medical reports, testimonies, evidence of logic and consistency of my actions." I immediately called Hamish to discuss defense strategy. He suggested we meet at his office in an hour. "I'll go with you," Freya said firmly. "I want to help, and I can testify in your favor, Grandpa. I can tell you that you've always been judicious, thoughtful, caring. That could put you in a difficult position with your parents," I warned. "I don't care." Her eyes sparkled with a determination so similar to Abigail's. "I'm not going to let Daddy do this to you, not after everything he's already done." In Hamish's office, we met the psychiatrist, Dr. Eleanor Reed, a short woman with a penetrating gaze and calm movements. Hamish had hired her for an independent evaluation of my mental state. "Mr. Wardrop," she shook my hand, "I'd like to run some tests on you. Nothing complicated, just standard procedure for assessing cognitive function and emotional state." I spent the next 2 hours answering questions, solving puzzles, memorizing sequences of numbers and words, and talking about my life and current situation. Dr. Reed listened attentively, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Well, Mr. Wardrop," she said, finishing her examination, "I don't see any signs of dementia or other pathology. Your thinking is clear, your memory is excellent for your age, and your emotional reactions are appropriate to the situation. I'll prepare a formal report by tomorrow." While we were discussing the details of the upcoming hearing, Ellsworth literally flew into Hamish's office. His face was red with anger. "So there you are," he pointed a trembling finger at me, "with your lawyer, planning how to get around the law and sell the house before the hearing?" "Ellsworth," Hamish's voice was icy, "you're intruding on a private meeting. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm not going anywhere." Ellsworth stepped forward. "Dad, you've got to stop this madness. Selling the house, traveling to Iceland. You don't know what you're doing." Freya stepped between us. "Dad, calm down." Her voice was firm. "Grandpa's perfectly all right. He knows what he's doing." Ellsworth stared at his daughter as if noticing her presence for the first time. "Freya, what are you doing here?" He frowned. "You're supposed to be at the university." "I came to support my grandfather," she answered calmly. "After I heard that you'd filed a suit to have him declared incompetent." Ellsworth turned pale. "You don't understand," he began. "Grandfather's not himself. He's making irrational decisions, being influenced by strangers." "The only irrational decision I've made," I interjected, "is that I've turned a blind eye to your greed for too long, Ellsworth." "Greed?" He laughed, but it sounded fake. "I'm trying to protect you. This house is your security, your home for the rest of your life. And you want to sell it and throw yourself into ventures that could end badly at your age." "A home is a building," I said calmly. "Security is about being able to make your own decisions, and I decided it was time for a change." "You," Ellsworth choked with anger, "you're just a selfish old man. All your life you've thought only of yourself, your expeditions, your rocks, your books. What about me? What about Mom? We've always come second." There was a heavy silence in the room. I looked at my son, trying to see in him the boy whom I had once taught to ride a bicycle, whom I had read books to before going to bed, whom I had comforted after the first heartbreak. But all he saw was a stranger, an embittered man. Mr. Wardrop, Dr. Reed broke the silence, turning to Ellsworth. I've just completed a psychological evaluation of your father. He's fully capable, rational, and adequate. His decisions, including the sale of the house, are well thought out and logical. I will provide an official report to the court, and believe me, your claim will be dismissed. Ellsworth turned even paler. Who are you? He asked hoarsely. Some fake expert his lawyer hired? I'm Dr. Eleanor Reed, she straightened. A practicing psychiatrist with 30 years' experience and a regular expert witness in court proceedings. My reputation is impeccable, and I suggest you reconsider your position before the hearing, Mr. Wardrop. Otherwise, you risk not only losing the case, but also facing charges of defamation and attempted fraud. Ellsworth stared at her with his mouth open. Then he looked at me, at Freya, at Hamish. His face contorted with impotent rage. This isn't over, he hissed, heading for the door. I have my own experts, and I'll prove that you're out of your mind, Dad, even if I have to remember every weird thing you've done in the last 10 years. As the door slammed shut behind him, Freya took a deep breath. Grandpa, I don't recognize him. This isn't the daddy I knew. I hugged my granddaughter, feeling her shiver. Money changes people, sweetheart, I said quietly, especially the fear of losing it. On the drive home, Freya and I were silent, each absorbed in our own thoughts. I was thinking about the upcoming court hearing, about having to publicly defend my sanity, my right to control my own life and property, that my own son would make me look mentally ill for money. But the strange thing is, I felt no fear or doubt, just determination. The court hearing lasted less than an hour. The judge, an older woman with a keen eye and an impressive track record, quickly got to the heart of the matter. Dr. Reed's report, the testimony of Deirdre, Freya, and several other people who interacted with me regularly, left no doubt. I was sane and fully capable of making decisions. Mr. Wardrop Jr., the judge addressed Ellsworth at the end of the hearing, I not only dismiss your lawsuit, but I am gravely concerned about the motives behind it. All indications are that you were not motivated by a genuine interest in your father's welfare, but by a desire to control his finances. I urge you to reconsider your behavior before this escalates into something more legally serious. Ellsworth sat with his head down, his shoulders slumped. Cassidy beside him was nervously rubbing the strap of an expensive purse, the latest acquisition despite their supposedly disastrous financial situation. When the judge announced the decision, she whispered something in her husband's ear, but he only waved her away. After the hearing, Ellsworth tried to approach me, but Hamish stepped between us. Mr. Wardrop does not wish to speak to you, he said firmly. All communications from now on are through me. But he's my father, Ellsworth objected. The father you tried to incapacitate for money, Hamish retorted. I think you have exhausted your right to communicate directly with him. A week after the trial, the sale of the house was finalized. The Brookses were the new owners, and I was a rich man with a check for $1,020,000. The feeling was strange, simultaneously liberating and unsettling. For so many years, my world had revolved around this house, and now I was free of it, free to start something new. Moving into the new apartment took a few days. It was a small but cozy one-bedroom apartment in downtown Buchanan overlooking the city park. High ceilings, big windows, modern layout, not at all like my old house. But that was the point. A new beginning, a new phase of life. I'd left most of the furniture with the Brookses. It fit perfectly in the old house, but would look ridiculous in a modern apartment. I took only the most valuable things, the mineral collection, books, photographs, and Abigail's personal belongings that I'd kept over the years. Deirdre was the first to visit, bringing me a bottle of good whiskey, and strangely enough, an edible pie as a housewarming gift. You finally learned to cook? I teased her, tasting a slice. I bought it at the bakery, she laughed. I didn't want to poison you in your new home. We sat on the balcony, watching the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky over the park in shades of pink and gold. You look peaceful, Deirdre remarked, looking at me carefully. No regrets? About selling the house? I wondered. Sometimes, especially when I wake up and forget where I am for a second. But then I remember that there are new places to go, new experiences, and the regret goes away. What about Ellsworth? She asked cautiously. Do you regret breaking up with him? I was silent for a long time, staring at the sunset. You know, I think the breakup happened a lot sooner, I said finally. I just didn't want to admit it. Ellsworth and I became strangers years ago. It hurts, of course. No parent wants to lose touch with their child, but sometimes you just have to accept things as they are. Deirdre squeezed my hand silently, a gesture of support, of understanding without words. The next day, Freya arrived. We took a long walk in the park, discussing my plans for my trip to Iceland. "I booked tickets for the 20th, I told her. "I'll be in Reykjavik by that evening." "In 2 weeks?" Freya looked surprised. "So soon?" "Why wait?" I smiled. "At my age, every day counts." We went back to the apartment, where I showed her my preparations for the trip: a new backpack, special clothes for cold climates, guidebooks, and geological maps of Iceland. "Grandpa, you look younger," Freya said, watching me. "It's like a weight has been lifted off your shoulders." "I have," I nodded. "It's weird, isn't it? I'd sold the house, had a fight with my son, changed my life completely. You'd think I should feel lost. And instead you feel free," she finished for me. "I could see it in your eyes." I hugged my granddaughter, grateful for her understanding. "Freya, I want to show you something." I led her to the small room I had set up as a study. In the corner stood an antique mahogany cabinet, the only thing from the old house that fit perfectly into the new apartment. I opened it, revealing a neatly arranged collection of minerals, hundreds of specimens collected over decades of expeditions. "This is yours now," I said, looking at her surprised face. "The whole collection. I signed the deed of gift. Legally, it belongs to you as of today." "But grandfather," Freya looked shocked. "It's your treasure, your life's work. One of a kind," I corrected. "And he's best off with you. You're the only one in the family who really appreciates science, the beauty of nature, the history of the earth captured in these stones." I pulled a small box out of my pocket and handed it to her. "And one more thing." Inside was an antique compass in a bronze case, tarnished by time. A rose of winds was engraved on the lid, and inside were the initials AMW Abigail Mary Wardrop. "Grandmother's compass," Freya whispered, taking it gingerly in her hands. "The one she'd gone on all her expeditions with?" "Yes," I nodded. "She said it always pointed in the right direction. Not just geographical direction, life direction. When she was in doubt about what decision to make, she would look at this compass and imagine that the arrow was pointing not north, but to the right choice." Freya clutched the compass to her chest, her eyes filling with tears. "I'll keep it safe, grandfather, I promise." On the day of departure, I woke up with the first rays of the sun. My suitcase had been packed the day before. All the necessary documents were in my briefcase. There was only one thing left to do. I took the envelope addressed to Ellsworth Wardrop out of my desk drawer and reread the enclosed letter one last time. "Ellsworth, by the time you receive this letter, I will be long gone from Buchanan. I sold the house, not out of revenge, not out of a desire to disinherit you, but because it's time for me to move on. For all of us. I hold no grudge against you for trying to have me declared incompetent. I understand that desperation can drive people to extreme measures. But I cannot and will not turn a blind eye to the way you have treated me over the past few years, as an obstacle to you getting your money. At Buchanan National Bank, I rented a safe deposit box. Inside is some of the money from the sale of the house I always wanted to leave you. Not as much as you'd hoped, but enough to help you get out of financial trouble if you use it wisely. The safe deposit box can only be opened after my death. This is not a punishment, but an attempt to give you what you truly deserve. Nothing more, nothing less. The box coordinates and access code are enclosed. Your father, Ezekiel Wardrop." I sealed the envelope, wrote my son's address, and set it aside. The letter would be sent by my lawyer in a week, when I was already in Iceland. Deirdre insisted on driving me to the airport. "I don't trust these cab drivers," she grumbled, as she helped me load my suitcase into the trunk. "God knows where they'll take you." We didn't talk much on the way. Something had changed between us after all these events, an understanding that didn't require words. "You know," she said as we drove to the airport, "I was thinking about what you said about traveling, about how at our age it's not too late to start something new." I looked at her curiously. "And I decided to follow your example," she smiled. "I applied to Doctors Without Borders. As a consultant, not as a field doctor, of course, but still." "Deirdre, that's great." I was really happy for her. "When will you know the results?" "In a couple weeks," she shrugged. "But you know, even if it doesn't work out, I already feel different. Like I'd opened a window in a room that had been stuffy for too long." At the airport, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Take care of yourself, old geologist," she said. and I heard an unusual tenderness in her voice. And send postcards from your Iceland. I will, I promised. And not just from Iceland. The flight went smoothly. I looked out the window, watching the clouds pass under the airplane's wing, and thought about the path that had brought me here. About the decisions made in anger and despair that suddenly opened a new chapter in my life. Reykjavik greeted me with a chilling wind and drizzling rain, but even that couldn't spoil the impression of the city. Clean, neat, with colorful houses and majestic mountains on the horizon. The small hotel I booked turned out to be cozy and warm. The hostess, an elderly Icelandic woman with kind eyes, personally escorted me to my room, telling me about the local attractions. "Is this your first time here?" she asked in surprisingly good English. "It is," I nodded. "But my wife and I have been dreaming about this trip for years. She was a geologist like me." "Was?" The hostess looked at me sympathetically. "She died 5 years ago," I replied. "But I feel that she is here with me. In a way, this is our journey together." The woman nodded understandingly and tactfully walked away, leaving me to unpack and get used to the idea that I was really here in Iceland, thousands of kilometers away from my old life. The next morning, I rented a car and headed out to one of the geothermal fields near the city. The day was clear, the wind had died down, and the sun illuminated a fantastic landscape, smoking fumaroles, bubbling mud pots, colorful mineral deposits around hot springs. I walked slowly, leaning on my cane, stopping to look at particularly interesting rock samples, to take photographs, to record observations in my notebook. It was as if I'd gone back 50 years to when Abigail and I were just beginning our careers as geologists. By noon, I reached the ocean shore, a stark, gray ocean, with waves crashing against black basalt cliffs. The wind had picked up, penetrating even through my warm jacket, but I was in no hurry to leave. I sat down on a large rock, looking out at the vast horizon where the sky merged with the water. In my pocket was a small bag of Abigail's ashes, a small portion I'd taken with me, leaving the main urn in the columbarium at Buchanan. "Here we are, Abby," I said aloud, pulling out the baggie. "Iceland. You've always wanted to come here." I untied the pouch and poured the ashes into the palm of my hand. The wind immediately picked up the gray particles, carrying them over the waves. "Rest in peace, my love," I whispered, watching the last particles disappear into the air. "You are now a part of this land you were so eager to explore." I sat for a long time, immersed in memories and reflections, of a life lived with the woman I loved with all my heart, about the son we lost even before his physical loss, of a granddaughter who inherited Abigail's best qualities, of Deirdre, whose friendship was an unexpected gift in her declining years. The sky was beginning to darken when I finally got up to walk back to the car. I felt no regret or bitterness, just a quiet confidence that my path was right. I may have lost the home I had lived in for most of my life. I may have severed my relationship with my son, but I had found freedom. Freedom to move on, to explore the world, to live life to the fullest, despite my age. There were long Icelandic twilights ahead, uncharted trails, new discoveries, and I was ready to meet them with the same curiosity and enthusiasm with which I had once set out on my first geological expedition. The Icelandic wind ruffled my gray hair as if welcoming a new friend. And somewhere far away, in Buchanan, Freya was holding her grandmother's compass, which always pointed in the right direction, and I knew she would find her way, as I had found mine.